Okay, so I have cut 3 strips of my ruffle fabric, and it is 1.5 inches wide by 25. And how I did that was I cut against the grain. And remember, when we're talking about grain, the grain is actually going this way. So by cutting the length this way, that is called against the grain. So really, I could just stretch and stretch and stretch this. This fabric actually has 100% stretch against the grain, and 50% stretch fabric with the grain. So it's very stretchy. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to set up my sewing machine to help me ruffle these strips into ruffles to help me gather them, and I'm going to show you how I do that with a really easy trick. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how my machine can gather this strip into a ruffle really easily. So the first thing I want to mention is that I am using a walking foot. Whenever you work with knits, if you use a walking foot, it will be so much easier. So the next thing that I want to show you is that I have my tension set between an 8 and a 9. You want that tension to be really high. And then the next setting is I'm on a straight stitch. This is actually the very first stitch that comes on in my machine when I turn it on. And I'm actually going to take my stitch length, and the highest it can go is a 5. So I'm going to probably do this at a 4.5. Alright, now I'm just going to start sewing. I'm not going to back stitch, and I want to make sure that I have plenty of thread as my tails. I'm going to sew in the center of this strip. Okay, so now that I'm at the end, I'm still not going to backstitch. I'm going to pull my ruffle out and have plenty of tail on each end of my threads. And as you can see here, I have a perfectly even gather of the ruffle. Okay, so now that I have my ruffles gathered, I am going to place them on to my leggings. Now, because people's machines are all a little bit different, it's possible that it did not get gathered the same for everyone, and so that's why we leave enough tails of the threads so that we can adjust it. So as I'm laying it on here, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to place that seam that made the ruffle right on my line, and as you can see, I'm running a little bit short. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to pull on my gather a little bit so that it can spread out a little. Okay, as you can see here, I definitely have this in the perfect spot, and oh my gosh, it is going to be so cute. So when I had stretched the threads and had pulled it out and had gathered it evenly all the way across, I did have a little bit of excess, and that's okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to start on one end and sew on top of or right next to the gathering stitch, and I'm going to attach it to the pants. And I just want to make sure that I mention this stitch, this gathering stitch, is actually directly on top of the line that I had made with my Sharpie earlier. So here I'm going to go and attach this ruffle into place. I'm actually not going to put all of the ruffles on by pinning them. I'm going to do them one at a time. I do find that that works easier than trying to juggle all of the different ruffles all at once. So I'll be right back. Okay, so I got the ruffle sewed on, and it's worth mentioning that when you sew the ruffle on, that you want to make sure that you change your settings on your sewing machine to be back to a stretch stitch. So after I got done, I went ahead and I pulled the pants just like this, because this stitch that I attached the ruffle with is very stretchy, as you can see, and what that did was it snapped the the basting stitch that I had used to gather my ruffle in the first place, and then I was able to easily pick it out with a seam ripper. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do the next ruffle, and this can be a little bit tricky, but what we're going to do is we're actually going to kind of move this ruffle off to the side as much as possible, and then we're going to do the same thing by attaching this ruffle to the leggings the same way that we had attached this one. And when we actually sew it on, we want to be careful that we don't accidentally clip any of these pieces of the ruffle as well.